Welcome home. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore. Baltimore Positive. We are taking the show on the road twice this week. We will be at Costas on Tuesday from 11 till 2. If this is after Tuesday and you want to listen, Friday's the day to come by at Fadley's before the ball game. The Corbin Burns show is on our side of the fence, so we could still get even for 1982 if you were so inclined. Milwaukee Brewers coming to town on Friday. We'll be at Fadley's live from 2 until 5. I will have Pac-Man scratch-offs to give away, also powered up by our friends at Jiffy Lube and Liberty Pure Solutions. Luke will be joining me from 2 until 3 talking some Oriole baseball. Then he will be scattering off to Oriole Park at Camden Yards for reporter's duty on a Friday night, and hopefully we get some decent weather around here. We've had WrestleMania. We've had solar eclipse. I don't know what else we're going to have here, but we've got games at Fenway Park. And I knew when Luke Jones, he spent the entire offseason pooping on the Boston Red Sox. I don't give them a chance. I don't give them a chance. Now we got to go up there and we got to play them. So I'm going to let you talk your game, and I'll try to track down Bob Ryan and Dan Shaughnessy, who's had some health issues amongst other things, to talk about the history of the Orioles and the Red Sox. But rare has it been in this century, or during my marriage, which is now 21 years old, where the Baltimore Orioles go to Boston and are the better team, or perceived as such, and they're not even the better team on the field because the Red Sox have gotten off to a start because you jinxed them.
Yeah, well, you could talk about all those guys up in Boston. They were the ones being critical of the Red Sox. It wasn't me.
It's the curse of Mookie Betts is what it is.
And again, it certainly helps that you've already played the Oakland Athletics and the Angels for what, six of those first 10
we
games.
played the Royals and the Pirates. Yeah.
Sure, but look, give them credit. And look, I don't care about 10 games compared to what the overall expectations are going to be. But in those 10 games, Red Sox have pitched really, really well. I mean, that's what really stands out. I mean, 7-3 through their first 10. I mean, everyone's going to have a stretch, other than maybe Oakland, where they win 7 of 10, right, to start a year. And even Oakland will have that at some point, as I say that in jest.
Marlins look like they might never win again too.
But the point is, when you look at the win-loss record early on, I mean, that's well and good, but look at the overall body of work. Look at the runs scored. Look at the runs allowed. And the thing that stands out in this division, perhaps more than anything, we've talked about the Orioles. The Orioles overall have pitched well so far, even with some of the questions about the bullpen. Cole Irvin at the back of the rotation, they pitched well. Red Sox have pitched even better than that, and they've scored runs. Sure, they've hit the ball, but they've really, really pitched well, and that's really what stands out when you look at a team that has a plus 26 run differential through their first 10 games. They pitched extremely well. So will that continue? I'm skeptical. But to this point, they've been one of the better teams in the American League and second place in the American League East as we begin a new week. So certainly when the Orioles are up at Fenway Park, I mean, they've got to start swinging the bats. And this isn't necessary. It might be the right ballpark, but might not be the right pitchers and the right staff they're going to face at the moment with the way that they've pitched. So, early on, you never really know. And I will say this, for as much as people were dismissing the Red Sox chances, I mean, I think back over the last 10 to 15 years, there have been a couple of those Red Sox teams that ended up either winning a World Series or being really, really good that didn't necessarily have those really high expectations going into a season.
Well, they had a DNA as a franchise for 15 years that even in the bad years where they're drinking beer and eating fried chicken in the clubhouse with Tito Francona, that they won World Series since then, literally.
They have. And like I said, I mean, some of those years were not necessarily the year that going into it, everyone thought they were going to be great. So again, it's 10 games, good, bad, in between. No one should be drawing too many conclusions, but they're off to a good start. And
like that B hat you have looks a little bit like the Boston Braves to me, just a little bit. I'm just saying.
It's not. It's a Baltimore Elite Giants Negro League cap. As a giveaway at the Orioles year, probably 6-7 years ago at this point. But yeah, it does look a little bit like that. I'll acknowledge that. But with the Red Sox, I mean, they pitched well. I mean, it's that simple. If you pitch well, you play relatively clean defense, and you get some timely hitting, which they've also scored runs at a good rate, then yeah, you're going to win 7 out of 10, and you're going to be in a position where you're winning baseball games. But they've certainly benefited from a softer schedule from the standpoint of, I don't think the Angels, even though the Angels' record isn't terrible, but I don't think they're going to be very good. And I certainly don't think Oakland's going to be very good. But hey, take care of the games on your schedule. We thought the Orioles' schedule was really soft, and maybe those teams are good, or maybe the Orioles just aren't playing as well as they need to be playing. But certainly going to be a challenge over these 3 games. Good news is Corbin Burns going, Grayson Rodriguez going in that series. So you have those 2 guys going right off the bat. You should have a really good chance of winning 2 out of 3. But certainly the bats need to wake up as they finish off this road trip at Fenway.
Well, we're going to get better weather like moving in here this week. I guess, my wife is up in New Hampshire and New England right now. It's always 20 degrees cooler. It's supposed to be like really nice here. We get back here over the weekend. The cold weather part of baseball, it's only April 8th. They used to have opening days, April 8th, April 9th, April 10th. They jacked this thing back into March, and the first week is slopping around. It was snowing the other day in Pittsburgh, for crying out loud. There's a point in all of this where, do you expect the arms to be ahead or the bats to be ahead? The bats are usually ahead in spring training because those guys are working. Pitchers can't stretch it out, but we are seeing guys, by the time they get up here, go 5, 6, 7 innings, no problem. It hasn't been like that at all because these guys are professionals and they start throwing in January. But the cold weather and the weirdness of all of it over the week, it's been an awkward start in that way. And that's why I see people getting all up in arms about blowing a game on Sunday. 162 games. I am extremely patient about this. Wake me on Memorial Day is what I said. Memorial Day, let me know if they're 1 game over 500 on Memorial Day, something's gone really terribly wrong.
Yeah, but even that, even Memorial Day, if it's not looking fantastic, it's still a lot of season left at that point. Truth be told, it's the ebbs and flows of a baseball season. You win 5 out of 9 at any other point in the season, people kind of shrug their shoulders, right?
It's not a slump, right?
Yeah, it's not. You're not at your best, but you're certainly not at your worst. And then I think most people are grounded with that thought, but the vocal minority, whether it's back in the day, it was always the individuals who called into sports talk radio first. Now it's Twitter or Facebook, whatever it might be. But they've got to play better. There's no doubt about that. But you mentioned the weather, and it's not an excuse for the Orioles specifically. It's just weird things happen. You mentioned the snow on Friday. That wasn't even snow. I think that was, I think I'm saying this right. That was grapple, I think, which is basically hail when it's cold out, right? It's, that was not even snow. That you could see it was bouncing off the ground. It's not an excuse for the Orioles. It just speaks
same stuff that was bouncing off of Earl Campbell back in '78 in a championship game. So nonetheless, I'm just Pittsburgh lore for you.
Yeah, exactly. But it's weird. It's odd. It's tough for anyone, not the Orioles, just anyone that you're going to try to settle into a routine. You're in Florida for 6 weeks, and then you come to a climate where it's cold or you're getting a lot of rain, as we saw during the Kansas City.
It's going to be lousy on Thursday in Boston, by the way, just ahead of time. It's supposed to rain Thursday in Boston, so they're going to play that game on the getaway.
Yeah, well, or maybe they don't because the Orioles come in for another series at Fenway. There's the difference right there between
last
that
week
scenario compared to the Royals. So we'll see. But yeah, it's strange, and some guys start off hot, other guys don't. When you have some question marks about your roster, that can be magnified early on, or maybe it looks really good early on. As we said about the Red Sox, so many questions for them, and they're playing really good baseball early on. Will that continue? I'm skeptical, but to this point, they played well. So, everyone's trying to find out. Everyone's trying to really see what they have, and I think that's part of where Mike Elias is with the Orioles roster. We've talked a lot about the bullpen. We've talked about whether they'll need another starting pitcher, depending on what happens with John Means, what happens with Kyle Bradish. We've talked about the bats here early on, not swinging at their best, and whether they were going to or not, we were always going to ponder changes to the active roster when you have the talent that you have at AAA Norfolk at this point. It's inevitable. Not just Jackson Holiday, but who else might be up here and contributing, and who gets hurt, who might get traded at some point in time. There's so many different moving parts, and it's tough to think about what a team's going to look like in 3 weeks, let alone in 3 months or 5 months, playing in October. So, from that standpoint, they're fine, right? I mean, that doesn't mean that they're flawless, but we're trying to see what this thing looks like, and the weather does make things a little strange, in terms of how some of these guys respond to playing in cold weather and all of that. So it's your Memorial Day statement is it's true. I mean, it doesn't mean we're not going to talk about it. It doesn't mean that you just give games away. Certainly doesn't mean you want to start out 0-9 or something crazy like that. But
Yeah,
where
when
they
your
stand
fake
right now,
closer blows a game and the guy you want to give $200 million to throws the ball into the dugout in Pittsburgh to cap a losing series in daylight when everybody's watching, people get a little reactionary. That's all. I mean,
yeah,
and you
yeah.
lose a series like that.
Well, but look, I mean, I'm not remotely concerned about Gunnar Henderson. I mean, just period. End of story. Like I've heard people talk about, defense at short. Look, we saw all season last year as the year went on and Jorge Mateo wasn't hitting at all. And you saw what kind of defense Gunnar Henderson gives you at shortstop. I mean, my goodness, that kind of a bad at shortstop. I mean, I don't need to tell Orioles fans what that means. I mean, having watched Cal Ripken a generation ago and what that can mean for value of a team when a shortstop can give you that kind of offense. I've heard people talk about Gunnar in the leadoff spot. Look, I'll hear that, but when I hear people say they want to put Cedric Mullins back there, I'm like, have we seen Cedric Mullins hit over the course of going back to the second half of last season? I'm not saying Gunnar long term is the leadoff hitter, but
Well, the
you need to
real
have
issue on
somebody to
the
put there.
internet is call all these kids up and let's play them. We're not playing our best players. So speak to that. We're not playing our best players. Mullins and Hayes are no longer our best players.
Well, that's to be TBD. Look, do I agree with that in a big picture sense? Yeah. I think that's going to prove out to be the case. However, we also need to acknowledge, as amazing as those numbers look at AAA right now, it's AAA. That doesn't mean that those guys are going to put up those numbers. Colton Cowser is a great example of this, of what we saw last year. Colton Cowser, look at the numbers he put up at AAA and look how he struggled and struggled big time last year to the point where the Orioles sent him back down. And I'm not picking on Cowser. I'm a Cowser guy. I've been talking about the fact that he should play more and Austin Hayes shouldn't be automatically an everyday starter in left field. And Mullen should get some time off as
By
well. But
Memorial Day, you're going to look like Kreskin on this one, the way this one's going, by the way.
well, we'll see. I mean, we'll see. And again, I don't want to bury Austin Hayes either. I mean, this guy made the All-Star team last year. Let's keep that in mind as well. But it's not just this. The holiday example is unique, right? Because the Orioles, where they stand right now, every day you're starting either Ramon Urias or Jorge Mateo at an infield spot, right? Henderson's playing short. It's either Mountcastle or O'Hearn at first, and Jordan Westberg's been playing second or third. So Urias or Mateo are starting every day. So there's a very easy, that's an easy change you can point to him. And again, we know what that's about, right? Whether it's going to be holidays here in the next 10 days, or whether he's here in May, or whether he's here in June, depending on how the Orioles are looking at that. Is there some merit to the idea of him playing second base and getting more reps and wanting to face left-handed pitching? I don't know how much left-handed pitching he's going to face of quality in AAA. Quality AAA pitching, guess what? That's usually in the majors really quickly. So I don't know how much he's going to face there. But with these other guys, it's not just as simple as just wanting to start DFAing people and start trading people and just clearing the deck. I'm not saying we're not going to get to that point at some point in time here. If you asked me back in October, I would have said I probably would have wagered some money that one of Mateo and Arias would be gone at this point in time, just because of where they were roster-wise. I would have said that there's probably a non-zero chance that they trade Santander or Hayes or Mullins because they have these guys that are seemingly ready to go at AAA. But you don't show much conviction as an organization if you make roster decisions and then you start making wholesale changes 10 games into the season. If I would see that, I would almost be more concerned about where the Orioles stand as an organization if they start changing.
You'd be thinking David Rubenstein's on the phone to Mike Elias telling him what to do,
I mean,
right?
Right. I mean, again, Holiday's the exception because there very clearly is a spot there ready to go for him, right? I mean, I think it's a matter of when. But it is a little more complicated because of what we're talking about here where, okay, Colton Cowser's already here and we're already talking about whether he should be playing more and Hayes should be playing less. So people want to start calling up Heston Kjerstad or Kyle Stowers. They can't all play. So you are in a position where, you got to let this play out. Again, Cedric Mullins was a 30-30 guy a couple years ago. That doesn't mean that he gets a free pass, forever. That doesn't mean that Austin Hayes gets a free pass and just is the everyday guy. I mean, I think we're already starting to see that that's looking like that could be morphing into a platoon sooner than later, with him and Cowser in left field. But you're also not going to just start jettisoning these guys from the roster, especially after 10 games, so that's where it is. I understand. Believe me, I want to see some of these young guys too. I mean, Heston Kjerstad doing what he's doing at AAA, and we saw him have a cup of coffee last year, and the power's impressive. I mean, there's no doubt about it. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that you just start getting rid of people on the major league roster, because we're talking about guys that are out of options. We're talking about guys that have had value, still have value, even if the perfect trade isn't manifesting today to make that move. But at the same time, yeah, Austin Hayes needs to start performing. There's no doubt. Cedric Mullins needs to perform with the bat. We're seeing it. The defense looks great, as it typically does, but you can't just have guys on the field solely for defense. You need guys that can be well-rounded players. And in the infield, I mean, to me, the guys that really are facing a lot of pressure are Arias and Mateo. I mean, when you just look at the reality of it, and that's not to say they're both going to be gone, but if you're truly wanting to put your best foot forward over the course of the entire season, it's going to be tough for me to see both those guys on the roster come September, come October. So,
well, Mateo has a different value as a runner.
He does, but at the same time, he's got to get on base. Now, to his credit, he's hit the ball pretty. He's been okay. At the plate. Arias has not been, and I love his versatility. I get it. And, same thing with him. You don't want to just jettison a guy who won a Gold Glove a couple years ago. At the same time, you got to hit. I mean, you've got to be able to get on base. You got to contribute offensively, and it's been a struggle for him. So, again, a week and a half into this thing, you're not going to make wholesale changes, but at the same time,
we're going to talk about who's coming
go time
in a way that
we've
never ever. I mean, I've been on the air 32 years. We've never been sitting around in April talking about wholesale players at AAA 3, 4, 5. I mean, I just like saying with a side of mayo. I like saying that while it's there. These guys that we've taken note of. It reminds me of my childhood with my pop in the 70s, where he would have the sporting news and be looking at the Rochester stats in the sporting news, and you'd see Dower, you'd just see all these names, Ripken, Murray, you would see these guys, be like, when are they coming up? When are they coming up? We haven't had a whole lot of when are they coming up around here in 32 years of baseball conversation around here.
It's usually one guy at a time, right? I mean, it's usually, I think back to when I was 10 years old, it was Jeffrey Hammonds, right? I mean, it's usually one guy. But it's also,
you've talked about Keegan Aiken, you talked about Dylan Bundy. You and I have had a 15-year, almost 16-year relationship on the air now, where there's been a guy, you've been talking about a guy, but not like anything other than Rutschman or like that kind of player is different. But, because all of these guys have been first-round picks, because all of these guys have been talked about for a period of time, because the team has been spotlighted by winning 100 games now, and Rutschman is turning on everybody's lights about the system, and the system's real. It's like the solar eclipse. We will not be having these conferences. I mean, this isn't normal for organizations to have 5 guys backed up in AAA and have won 101 games.
Well, I just pulled up the Norfolk stats. And look, this is 9 games. Again, this is a very small sample size, but Jackson Holliday has a 1095 OPS, on base plus slugging percentage. Heston Kjerstad has a 1548 OPS. I mean, that's Babe Ruth stuff right there. I mean, Heston Kjerstad has 25 RBIs in 9 games. I mean, remember when Chris Davis had, 16 RBIs the first 4 games of 2013? I mean, video game stuff. Kobe Mayo, 1091. Connor Norby, who we barely even talk about, but he's a viable major league infielder. He has a 1205 OPS. Kyle Stowers, 1253. He has 18 RBIs and 6 home runs. So you go down the list of guys. I mean, it's just, you're in awe of those numbers. Now, that doesn't mean you call up those 6 guys. No one's suggesting this with any level of seriousness. Doesn't mean you're going to call up those 6 guys and get rid of 6 guys at the major league level, and those guys are all going to put up those numbers in the major leagues. We've also seen that. We've seen Kyle Stowers struggle. We've seen Colton Cowser struggle. We saw Adley Rutschman struggle his first month in the big leagues. Gunnar Henderson his first couple months in the big leagues last year. So there's always that learning curve. But yeah, when you see that, I mean, it's competition. And I think, I talked about this with Austin Hayes in the clubhouse in Sarasota the last week of spring training. Yeah, there is that sense. And I wasn't talking to him individually just because he's struggling, but we were just talking about it in a general sense that there is some pressure, I think, when you just look at that and say, hey, I've got to perform. It's not just, the guys aren't on scholarship indefinitely. I think
well, there's no woe is me if you're a ball player. You get up and you take your at-bats and you certainly examine them with coaches and video and all of that at this point. A couple guys talking on sports radio, Hayes and Mullins know what's going on here. They know they might wind up with the Detroit Tigers by the end of the year for all, and same thing with Mountcastle's dealt with this for 2 years. I mean, I would call it the Patrick Queen syndrome, right? You want to play and go get paid. You go play for the Yankees or the Red Sox if you're good enough, right? But you're probably not going to be here, and your agent's probably telling you that too. And you realize that things are about to change. Now, whether you hang on and get a ring here or not, got to be hitting better than 079 a week and a half into the season, man.
Yeah, no question about it. And I'm glad you brought up Ryan Mountcastle because I actually wanted to bring it up. I mean, at different points over the last couple of years, we've talked about, the long-term viability of him on the roster, with whether it's not drawing walks or last year really scuffling with the bat. I mean, remember he had the bout of vertigo where he was on the injured list. He came back and he performed at a pretty high level. Now, did have the late season shoulder issue that I think really hurt him down the at least not even the stretch. Really, it was just the last couple of weeks of the season. But there's a perfect example of we're still dealing with small sample sizes, and just because someone's struggling at one point in time doesn't mean that we're going to have a totally different conversation. Austin Hayes could go 6 for his next 11 at Fenway, and his average looks better, and he hits a couple home runs, and we're not talking so much about guys at replacing him, right? So again, you let that play out, but Mountcastle's been one of their best hitters early on. That still doesn't make me change my mind of he's not someone I identify right now that I'm giving a long-term contract to. But in the meantime, it's hitting well, right? He's been a big part of what they've done offensively. He's drawn some walks to his credit. So, I mean, that's, again, ebbs and flows of the season, but there is competition, right? I mean, you can have a bad 2-3 weeks to start the season, but that turns into 6 weeks or that turns into 2 months, then yeah, we're going to be having a different conversation.
Hayes and Mullins at this point have almost 3 times the amount of at-bats as Cowser. That will change if Cowser's still batting 300 and they're batting 100.
Yeah, well, and we've talked about this. I mean, Santander's the one that's in a contract year, but in the case of both Mullins and Hayes, I mean, these are guys that are going to be free agents after next season. So you're even trying to thread that needle, and that's why I've been so adamant talking about Cowser, not because I'm 100% convinced and totally sure that he's going to be a really good major league player, but I've seen what he's done to this point in his professional career, understanding that he's a rookie, understanding he has 6 years of club control, which is, and especially the next few years, is going to be very cost effective compared to those veteran players who are approaching free agency, getting more and more expensive, but also, and this is the part I care about more, I do wonder how high their ceiling is compared to the youngster. So yeah, we get into this question where we say, okay, Cedric Mullins coming off of injuries last year. Austin Hayes, last 2 years, really good first half, not so good second half.
Well, this is the Tampa model that at-bat for left field or center field this time next year will be Cowser at league minimum versus Mullins at 12 million or 14 million, whatever his number will be, right? Like, that's the reality of the math of having 12,000 people in the stands and having empty seats and not having beer. And like that is the difference to me. as to what you're going to invest in and how you're going to invest, and whether you're going to operate more like Tampa or more like the Cardinals or the Tigers. Or, I don't know how they're going to operate. This is why I need to talk to the owner. This is why I need my media pass back. All of this needs to be examined, and all of it. And I think I have the hardest time because the uniforms look the same, and Kevin Brown, and sometimes like even Melanie Newman, who I listened to on Saturday, they all feel like they're in hostage mode from the old ownership. The new ownership and the old ownership, there are going to be differences. And I don't know how quick they are. I don't know where David Rubenstein is on a daily basis. I know he's not sitting in the warehouse with his feet up on the phone to the manager telling him who to play tonight. It's not going to be that circumstance. But I'm examining all of this because you're just examining the baseball side to some degree, and fans are like, who's taking the at-bats tonight? I'm trying to examine the like whole of the moon and say, what kind of franchise are you going to be? Because in the near short term for any of these players, I would agree with you with Mullins and Hayes. These are not guys we're going to give $150 million to. And if that's
Nor
not the
should you.
case, right, and you have blue chip first round draft picks who are hitting 500 at AAA, it's very obvious there's a math part of this, but I don't know what the bigger part of the math equation is as far as, well, if Burns works out, are you really going to give him $180 million? Or, I mean, I don't know, but that kind of money for the 3 or 4 players they're going to go all in on, those are the biggest decisions they'll make above and beyond who's coming out of the bullpen tonight. Where that money goes and how do they utilize that. And in the early going, you and I will be monitoring just the at-bats of Hayes and Mullins the next 90 days to say how many are they getting and how many are going to be the cheaper at-bats. Because I would agree with you. If they're going to play under the John Angelos umbrella, everything you're saying and we're saying makes sense. I don't know where that is in the Rubenstein umbrella.
Yeah, and I want to be clear. Look, the Orioles could have a $250 million payroll, and these are things that smart organizations are going to do. If you have younger players that have a higher ceiling and you project to be better than what those guys, and look, Hayes and Mullins, I like, look, those were some of the few players, major league players I was actually watching 4 or 5 years ago that were real major league players, right? When we're talking about as low as the lows were for the rebuild. So we're picking on them a little bit, but at the same time, it's where they're the deepest as in terms of major league ready talent. You do look at the outfield, and although we could make the same argument about Arias and Mateo, I think it's a much easier argument in the infield, with Arias and Mateo than it is for Hayes and Mullins, who have both been to an All-Star game, for example. But I don't care what the payroll is. I don't care who the owner is going to be. If you have younger, cheaper, and guys you project to be better coming from AAA, it's not a decision. You're not just going to give guys long-term contracts just for the sake of doing it. It's what happened with Chris Davis, right? They gave Chris Davis $170 million, and that was a disaster. So when you do give those contracts out, and look, I'm hoping those contracts will be there for a Gunnar Henderson or an Adley Rutschman or a Jackson Holiday or a Grayson Rodriguez, maybe. We'll see it. It's a little different with the pitcher, obviously. But at the same time, you've got to identify the right ones, and you've got to thread the needle. And this is where I think there's a challenge for the organization in terms of you have these known commodities and guys that have performed at a certain level and guys that have performed at a high level. I don't want to pick on Mullins and Hayes because of how they're performing this week, the first week in April of 2024. They have a body of work. But at the same time, how do you balance wanting to win games at the major league level, which obviously the Orioles want to do? How do you balance winning in 2024 while also acknowledging you have all of this great young talent that is seemingly ready to go at AAA? How do you thread the needle in terms of balancing those two objectives, which is winning today and winning tomorrow and winning next week and winning next month, and also trying to find out about Colton Cowser or Heston Kjerstad when he arrives, or if Connor Norby gets a chance at some point. Certainly Jackson Holiday, again, to me, that's
to your point, like the Mayos
argument.
and the Norbys, when they're losing games in Pittsburgh because they don't have a bullpen, some of those guys need to be farmed out to get major league talent here if you're not ever going to bring them up and
Yeah.
they're not going to have a role, and they would have value to get you your next Danny Coulomb or whatever you're going to need
Yeah.
to make this happen, that is the weight of all of their analysis, is to say these guys at AAA, they're not helping us at the big leagues when we're losing ball games up here because of deficiencies we have in other areas. And that would be everything about their pitching at this point. They need some help.
Or it's not just, you're right about that, or it's, you might have a match with a team that has, I don't even want to say an extra reliever, because it sounds weird saying that, because you can never have too much pitching, right? I mean, team to team, we hear that all the time. But it might not just necessarily be a prospect. It might be, maybe a team has a need for an outfielder, and Austin Hayes is that guy you send with a couple prospects to go get arm A, right? I mean, whether it's a starter, reliever, whatever it is. So it can be a combination of those things. It can be some prospects and a veteran that you don't.
Well, they would
feel
be much more likely to go get a starting pitcher if they realize Means and Bradish aren't going to happen for them, right?
Well, and that's part of what, yeah, I mean, that's where this is a challenge, and we talked about it at the time. I mean, the guy that I've talked about a lot that, that I really envision being a part of the potential back end of their bullpen was Tyler Wells. Tyler Wells is their number 3 starter right now. And, it's, at best, it's been choppy. It wasn't very good over the weekend. But I think he's someone that, in a big picture sense, if everyone's healthy, and again, that's a big if, I think he's the kind of guy that could be an 8th inning or even a closer type for you. That's why that was one of the reasons, not just getting Corbin Burnes, but it was a thought of slotting everyone else down. Kyle Bradish is your number 2 starter. Grayson Rodriguez is your number 3 starter. Then John Means factors in there. Dean Kramer presumably is your number 5 starter.
All those fantasies we had back when the Ravens were hosting the AFC Championship game and they dealt for Burnes, the deep depth and all that. 10 days in, some of these names that were penciled in number 2 pencil, we got the eraser out, and we've had to move other guys up the board, right? And even, Kramer's an is to all of us, but some days he looks like a 1, some days he looks like a 10.
Yeah, I mean, maybe not a 10, but he looks like a 5, right? He looks like, yeah. So, yeah, I mean,
Tyler Wells looks like a 5 every time.
But this is how it works, though. When you have pitcher injuries, I mean, the Yankees don't have Garrett Cole right now. The Braves lost Spencer Strider, and that doesn't look promising at all. Garrett Cole is out at least the first 6 weeks or whatever it is. I mean, that sounds very Bradish like, right?
They won 101 games last year, and think about Bradish and think about Batista and their role in that 101 wins. And you tell me, I'll give you Burnes and all that, but then you look at the rest of the rotation and what the rest of them need to be and what they need to look like. I'm not on orange alert around here or anything, but I do think on a night-by-night basis, their pitching's not as good as we thought it was for a minute back in January. Now that we're seeing it, we're like, okay, pitching's not nearly, and you said this all the spring training, you were unhappy with most of it most of the time, especially when Bradish's arm fell off early day 1, and we're like, okay, you take him out, now you're playing Jenga. Now you've got the house of cards where, Cano's just going to come in and close a game on a Sunday in Pittsburgh. Sure he is.
Well, and let me be clear, the way you described it, I just want to push back a little bit. When I say I was unhappy about it, doesn't mean I think it was bad. It meant there could still stand to be improvement.
It needed to be augmented. It wouldn't be good enough. It wouldn't be good enough.
And it's more through that lens, because again, it goes back to what I said in a previous segment when I said, okay, admirable how the Orioles bullpen navigated the September last year without Felix Bautista. Doing that for 6 months, though, that is a different conversation.
They put a $13 million Band-Aid on it that wasn't available Sunday.
Well, but that's going to be the case for anyone, right? Mariano Rivera had his days where he wasn't available. I mean, but that's why I said you need to me a minimum of 4 guys that you can trust to pitch in a 1-run game in the 8th or 9th inning. When I go back to the Orioles of the Buck era, bullpen, arguably their biggest strength year in and year out on that team. You had Zach Britton, you had Darren O'Day. Darren O'Day was the anchor because they had different closers over that time, but Darren O'Day was the guy that you could count on. He's going to pitch the 8th inning. He's going to pitch the eighth inning a lot. He's going to pitch at a high level. But
And you can bring him in with 2 outs in the seventh, and he might be able to get you out of it and still get you through the eighth.
exactly. And
Yeah.
he closed on occasion, on days when Zach Britton or Jim Johnson wasn't available. I mean, but you had those two guys. You had Brad Brock. You had Andrew Miller. You had Michael Givens and again, I'm not saying you had all those guys at the same time, but the point is they all kind of fit into that same category where you had 4 guys that you could trust. Now, that doesn't mean that Michael Givens trying to close a game on occasion was the same thing as Zach Britton. I'm not saying that all 4 of them are all-star relievers, but there's a certain threshold where you need to have that. And that's why I kept saying last year down the stretch before Batista got hurt, and I wasn't the only one, everyone was saying this, that it couldn't just be Cano and Batista every single night. So that's where the Orioles find themselves right now where, okay, you have Kimbrel. I'm not down on Craig Kimbrel, but he's not going to be Felix Batista. Even if Craig Kimbrel has an all-star first half, he's not going to be Felix Batista for you. I mean, Felix Batista had was on his way to a historic season last year. Still kind of had it, even missing the last 5 weeks or so. But Cano, look, he was phenomenal in the first half last year, and he wasn't bad in the second half, but it was just a little more that he became, he's a good 7th and 8th inning pitcher for you. But, you look beyond that, Danny Coulombe, by the way, I haven't even mentioned that. I mean, his work he did over the weekend, I mean, 8th inning on Saturday, or not 8th inning, but Saturday, his work that he did, but is he going to do that over the course of a full 6 months like he did last year? I mean, relief pitching is just unpredictable. It really is. And that's why you need as much of it as possible, because I was even someone had done, I think it was a study I read that was talking about just relief pitching from year to year. It was actually a book I was reading by Keith Law, and it was just talking about relievers and long-term deals. And, a guy has a really good year, but then you look at the next year, what are the odds of that pitcher duplicating that? And typically it's not great. I mean, for every Mariano Rivera, Craig Kimbrel, you hope Felix Batista, guys that do it year in and year out for a long time. There are so many guys that are, a flash in the pan that they have a great season and then someone gives them money that following off season and then they are not very good the year after that. So again, you need as much as possible, but where the Orioles stand right now with their pitching and specifically with the bullpen, they've got to they need some guys that can miss a few more bats. And you need 1 or 2 guys to step up. And on those days when Kimbrel is down or Cano is down, you need to have a Mike Baumann, and I'm just saying what they're trying to do with him. Mike Baumann's got to come in and pitch the 8th inning for you, and he's got to be able to get outs. And if it's Dylan Tate, and hopefully he's back to being healthy and looking like the guy he was a couple years ago, which was helpful. He was their 3rd best reliever in 2022, but he missed all of last year with an elbow issue. But Dylan Tate might have to pitch the 8th inning or the 9th inning on occasion. So you can't just throw the same 2 guys night in and night out. And this goes back to what we joked about for 3 months last year. Your offense needs to score some more runs and not be in 1-run games all the time, right? So, hey, they did that against the Angels the first 2 games of the season and they won. But we've seen it here, and we saw it in Pittsburgh where they didn't score runs on Saturday and Sunday to a degree that you'd like to see. And it's more of a struggle then. So other team tries to. I'm not. What I'm saying here isn't sounding the alarm. It's not pushing the panic button. It's just speaking candidly with where I think this team is right now, which is I think they're a high-end bullpen guy, short of feeling good about that group. And on the rotation side, and look, this is the Rays dealt with. I mean, look at what the Rays lost last year in the rotation, injury-wise. I mean, it's part of it. You're going to lose some people. I mean, that's just how this works. But feel great about Burns. Feel great about Grayson Rodriguez. Feel good about Dean Kramer. Tyler Wells, we'll see. Cole Irvin, we'll see. But you're hoping, because John Means is making starts at AAA Norfolk, you're hoping Means' return is not imminent, but maybe the next 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Maybe you get John Means back, and hopefully he can settle into number 3, number 4 starter spot, something like that. And, we'll see how Kyle Bradish continues to progress in Sarasota. So, the these pitching issues are not exclusive to the Orioles, right? I mean, it's not as though all the other contenders in the American League are sitting there saying, "Oh, our pitching's fine. We couldn't use another starter, another bullpen arm. No, thanks, we're good." No, no one says that. Everyone needs more pitching, right? I mean, that's just how this works. So, where the Orioles stand right now, I still feel really good about this club, but could they stand to make some improvement? Yeah. And I think that's what's going to be interesting as we get deeper into the season and we're evaluating this talent at AAA Norfolk, evaluating incumbents on the roster, seeing what moves you can potentially make to add another bullpen arm, see where you are with Bradish and Means, and hopefully keep everyone else healthy, right? I mean, that's part of this as well. You don't want another pitcher to wake up with a cranky elbow. Braves are dealing with that right now with Strider. So it's just this is the challenge of navigating a 6-month season. Of how things look right now doesn't mean it's going to look that way 2 weeks from now or 2 months from now or 5 months from now. So in the meantime, Orioles are off to a perfectly fine start. They lost a series. It's not the end of the world, but some of these questions that we had over the course of the offseason, surprise, surprise, 10 games in, I still have those same questions. I haven't had any answers, which why would there be answers 9 or 10 games into the season?
Luke Jones is here. He will be there. We'll be at Camden Yards on Friday. We will be at Fadley's together on Friday from 2 until 5 talking Oriole baseball. Luke will do the first hour. We'll be having some Baltimore positive. I will have some Maryland Lottery scratch-offs to give away, hopefully for some Pac-Mans by Friday if I get in touch with Roz and stop down at the Maryland Lottery facility at Montgomery Wards. It's actually in my shot. It's actually over the shoulder right here. There's a Maryland Lottery. We're also going to be at Costas on Tuesday, too, in baseball. I just got to give you this before we punt on baseball here. I just looked down on my timeline. Buster Olney, who's at the top of my timeline because Oriole fans fight with him all the time. It's great. And Buster was one of the first guests I ever had in my studio when he covered the Baltimore Blast game in Baltimore as a San Diego Sockers reporter. And I had almost taken a job at the San Diego Union Tribune. He came into my studio, did like a Blast segment. And 2 years later, he's covering the Orioles. So I've known Buster since he covered indoor soccer. So Buster just retweeted, Henry Aaron's 715th career homer is called by Vin Scully 50 years ago today. Not my first baseball memory because I went to Memorial Stadium in 73. I do remember seeing Louis Aparicio play for real. I do remember going to playoff games 73. I remember Pete Rose and Bud Harrelson. That was the 73 thing. I remember Rusty Staub in the World Series. But my first real baseball memory was 50 years ago today. I completely remember my dad having the game on NBC. I completely remember sitting in the living room and watching Al Downing and the ball going over the fence and being caught in the bullpen at Fulton County and the launch pad and all that stuff. So 50 years ago today, I had a baseball memory with Hank Aaron, man. Does that make you feel old that you know me?
That's awesome. Well, I mean, that was 9 years before I was born, but now it's 50 years, 40 some years after that, right? So yeah, I mean, there's no question. I mean, it's funny you mentioned that. I thought what Blanco for the Astros, throws a no hitter. What, he had 6 no-hit innings or 5 no-hit innings in his second start. I mean,
wake up Vandermeer.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, but that's why we love baseball, right? All the issues, and baseball has its issues. I mean, all the sports do to varying degrees, but baseball has its issues. We've talked about that. We'll continue to talk about it. Health of pitchers being near the top of the list for me. I mean, the lack of star pitchers. Go look at the AL ERA leaders from a year ago and see how many of those guys are hurt right now. I mean, it's striking. It's really unsettling, quite frankly. That said, whether it's the anniversary of 715, whether it's talking about what Ronel Blanco is doing for the Astros and Johnny Vandermeer comparisons, because baseball fans know that, right? Back-to-back no-hitters. I mean, it's the sport more than any other that really cherishes numbers.
56 games in a row never happened. Trust me, that's not going to happen. That's just exactly. Never going to happen.
26-32, right? 21-31 to 26-32. I mean, but we value that, right? I mean, we love that history of the game, and that's where baseball. Look, the NFL's king by a lot, not even close. Every other sport's chasing it. NFL's tops in this country, and the NFL offseason is second, as a lot of people point out. But I mean, the history of the game and those moments, those feats, the record book. That's why people were so frustrated and disenchanted and disillusioned by the steroid era because of what it did to the record book. But yeah, you hear something like that, and to your point, whether it was a long time ago and it makes you feel old, or whether it's seeing some new pitcher do something really exciting for an Astros team that's really struggling otherwise early on this season. It's why I love baseball. It's why I'll never give up on it, even if I am frustrated with the state of the sport at times.
Luke Jones will join us on Friday at Fadley's. Come on down, say hello, get a lottery ticket, get a crab cake, maybe have a little shrimp salad and some of that delicious mac and cheese, ice cold beer at Fadley's as well in the brand new, spacious, luxurious new Lexington Market. So I've been waiting to say that for a long time. So come on by. It's a half a block closer to the ballpark. You're 3 blocks in the ballpark. Come on by, get a crab cake and a beer. We'll be live from 2 until 5 unless somebody kicks the internet and knocks us off the air, or if I got to go tinkle, trying to figure out how to make 3 hours live and not have a good bathroom situation with sprinting. But we're going to figure it all out. Life at 55. We are doing a 25-year documentary. Actually, it's a 40-year documentary of my media career. Greg Landry came to me last year talking documentaries. I put a lot of time into it. Greg has put a lot of love into it. A couple of weeks from now, it will be out, and Luke's even in it. That's how good it is. I am Nestor. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore positive.